At the edge of a snowbound Montana forest, Elias Mercer lived in a cabin too quiet for a grieving man. He had lost his wife and grown son on a mountain road no one wanted to question. Then an old German shepherd named Vesper entered his life, limping, watchful, and carrying a past of her own. She did not bring easy comfort. She brought Elias back to the places he had spent years avoiding. In the snow, they found more than tracks, more than rusted metal, more than an old warning sign. They found a truth the town had buried and a reason to open one locked house again. If this story touches your heart, tell us where you're watching from. Leave a like and subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Elias Mercer had learned that a house could breathe. Not in the way living things breathed, not with lungs or hunger or sleep, but with memory. The old Mercer house in the center of Brindle Falls breathed through its floorboards every time the furnace clicked on. It sighed through the upstairs vents. It whispered through curtains Naomi had chosen during a spring sale, pale blue with tiny white flowers, because she said winter needed something gentle to apologize for it. 3 years after she died, those curtains still hung in the front room. Elias had meant to take them down. He had meant to do many things. He had meant to clear Luke's climbing maps from the kitchen wall, the ones marked with pencil circles and little arrows where his son had planned summer hikes. He had meant to box up Naomi's wool scarf, the green one she always left over the armchair, no matter how many times she promised she would put it away. He had meant to stop standing in the kitchen at dawn, staring at the 2 empty spaces at the table like a man waiting for a verdict. But grief was a stubborn landlord. It collected rent even from rooms no one lived in. So Elias left the house standing. He paid the taxes. He fixed the roof when the wind tore shingles loose. He shoveled the front walk after snowstorms, though no one came through the door anymore. He did not sell it. No matter how many letters arrived from realtors, developers, and men with smooth voices who spoke of opportunity as if opportunity had not already taken enough from him. But he could not live there. Instead, Elias lived at the edge of Sawtooth Hollow, in a narrow log cabin that leaned slightly to the east, as though tired from holding up the mountain. It sat where the last gravel road surrendered to pine woods, beneath a slope that turned silver whenever snow fell. In winter, the cabin smelled of split cedar, damp wool, old coffee, and the faint iron scent of the wood stove. It was small enough not to echo. That was why he had bought it. Elias was 51 years old, though the mirror sometimes offered him a man older than that. He stood a little over 6 feet, broad through the shoulders, lean from work and discipline rather than vanity. His hair, once dark brown, had thinned into ash and silver at the temples, cut short, because long hair required attention he no longer wanted to give. A salt and pepper stubble shadowed his jaw most mornings. A thin scar ran from his right temple down near the cheekbone, pale as a winter creek beneath the skin. His eyes were the color of storm water over stone. People in Brindle Falls often said he looked calm. They were wrong. Elias did not have calm. He had containment. Every morning before sunrise, he ran. He ran the narrow trail behind the cabin, past the deadfall pines and the frozen creek, up toward the lower ridges where the world opened into white slopes and black branches. He ran until his lungs burned. He ran until the old aches in his knees woke up and argued. He ran until his heart pounded louder than the memories. On better days, he climbed. On worse days, he worked. The Brindle Falls supply yard paid him by the hour to move lumber, stack cement bags, repair fencing, unload trucks, and do any job younger men complained about after 10 minutes. Elias never complained. He liked the blunt honesty of weight. A beam was heavy or it was not. A nail bent or it held. A man could grip a shovel and know exactly what was being asked of him. The body, at least, could be exhausted into silence. The mind was less obedient. At night, the cabin became too quiet. Elias would sit at the small table beside the window, a chipped mug between his hands, looking out at the black line of pines. Sometimes he touched the ring that hung beneath his shirt on a leather cord. Naomi's ring. His own wedding band stayed on his finger, but hers rested near his heart, where it could do the most damage. Luke would have made a joke about that. His son had inherited Naomi's humor and Elias's stubbornness, a dangerous combination in a young man who believed mountains were only there to be climbed and rules only existed so a person could improve them. 24 years old enough to be a man. Young enough that Elias still remembered the weight of him as a sleeping child on his shoulder. He did not let himself stay with that image long. There were places inside a man that, once entered, did not easily let him back out. On Wednesdays, Elias drove into town to see Dr. Maren Whitlock. Her office sat above the old pharmacy, up a narrow staircase that smelled faintly of dust and peppermint. Maren was 46, with calm brown eyes, chestnut hair usually tied low at the nape of her neck, and a way of listening that made silence feel less like a punishment. She did not crowd him with comfort. Elias appreciated that. Comfort, badly offered, could feel like someone stepping on a broken bone and calling it kindness. That afternoon, snow had begun to fall in slow, deliberate flakes beyond her window. "You're still giving away most of what you don't need," Maren said. Elias looked at the floor. "I don't need much." That wasn't a criticism. Sounded like one. A small smile touched her mouth. "That may be because you hear concern as accusation." He almost smiled back. Almost. He had spent the week repairing a fence for an elderly couple and quietly paying for a month of heating fuel for a man at the church shelter. He had also skipped 2 proper dinners and patched his left boot with duct tape. Maren knew enough not to call that generosity without also naming the wound beneath it. "You help people," she said, "but you rarely let people help you." "I'm not in need of rescue." "No," Maren said gently, "but you may be in need of company." The word landed harder than it should have. Elias shifted in the chair, broad hands resting on his knees. His knuckles were scarred from years of work, war, and old habits he did not speak about. People require explanations. Not always people. He lifted his eyes. Maren opened the folder beside her, but did not look down at it. "The rescue barn is holding a winter adoption day this weekend. June Haskell asked if I knew any veterans with experience around working dogs. She has a few animals who need quieter homes." "No." You answered quickly. "Because it's a bad idea." "Why?" Elias looked toward the window. Outside, the pharmacy sign swung gently in the wind. "Because dogs trust you." Maren waited. "And if they trust you," he added, voice lower, "you owe them." The room held that truth for a moment. He had worked with dogs before, overseas and stateside, dogs who moved through dust and smoke with a courage that made human bravery look like theater. He had seen what loyalty cost. He had seen it paid in blood, in silence, in a handler kneeling beside a body that would not rise again. Maren did not push. That was one of the reasons Elias kept coming back. "It's just an event," she said. "You don't have to adopt. You don't have to promise anything. You could simply stand near something alive for an hour." He huffed once through his nose. "That your professional recommendation?" "No," she said. "That's my human one." Later, Elias stopped at the old house. He had not planned to. The truck seemed to turn there by itself, tires crunching over snow as if following a path worn by ghosts. The house stood beneath a soft gray sky, tall and white-trimmed, with the porch Naomi had loved because it caught morning light. Snow rested on the railing. No footprints marked the steps. He sat in the truck for 10 minutes before going inside. The air was cold. He kept the heat low to save money, and because warmth made the house feel too close to alive. Dust floated in the hallway when he opened the door. The kitchen waited at the far end, neat and unbearable. On the counter sat a small ceramic bowl Naomi had used for lemons, empty now. Above the table, Luke's map still held its pencil marks. Elias reached up and touched one of the circled trails, a ridge route north of Black Antler Pass. His finger stopped there. Black Antler. The name was enough. Snow, headlights, a sheriff's voice. The terrible politeness of men who brought news because there was no gentle way to carry it. His hand fell. For a moment, the house seemed to draw breath around him. Then a knock sounded at the front door. Elias turned. Conrad Voss stood on the porch in a charcoal overcoat that looked too clean for the weather. He was 55, silver-haired, smooth-faced, and polished in the way of men who had never split their own firewood. Even the snow seemed reluctant to cling to him. "Elias," Conrad said warmly, as though they were old friends and not two men standing on opposite sides of a locked gate. "I saw your truck. That usually means someone's here." Conrad smiled, accepting the jab as if it were a compliment. "I won't take much of your time. You already are." The smile thinned, but only slightly. Conrad glanced past him into the hall. His eyes moved over the old house with the quiet appetite of a buyer imagining walls removed, floors refinished, history erased. "I wanted to speak with you again about the property." "No? You haven't heard the new offer." "I heard enough of the old ones." "This town is changing," Conrad said. "The resort road would bring business, jobs, visitors. Your land is central to that growth." "My land," Elias repeated. "Of course." Conrad adjusted one leather glove. "But sentiment can become expensive." Elias stepped onto the porch and closed the door behind him. Snow fell between them, soft as ash. Conrad lowered his voice. "You don't live here anymore. You barely maintain the place. Forgive me, but from the outside it looks less like devotion and more like decay." Something moved in Elias's jaw. Conrad saw it. Of course he did. Men like him lived by finding bruises and pressing gently. "I'm offering you a way forward," Conrad said. "A generous one." Elias looked at the street, at the white roofs of Brindle Falls, at the church steeple rising beyond the bare cottonwoods. The town looked peaceful from here. It always had. That was the trick of snow. It covered everything and called the world clean. "My wife planted sage by that porch," Elias said. Conrad blinked, thrown off by the softness of the answer. "My son broke his wrist falling off that maple when he was 9. Lied about it for 20 minutes because he thought I'd be mad." Elias looked back at him. "That house isn't an obstacle on your map." "I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did." The silence sharpened. At last Conrad's smile returned, smaller now, colder. "Grief can make a man unreasonable." Elias opened the truck door. "Money can do worse." He left Conrad standing in the snow. That night, back at the cabin, Elias did something he had not done in months. He spoke aloud to the empty chair across from the table. It had been Naomi's chair, though here in the cabin she had never sat in it. Maybe that was why he could pretend. The wood stove cracked softly. Wind brushed snow against the windows. Outside, the pine trees swayed like old witnesses. "Marin thinks I need a dog," he said. The chair, mercifully, did not answer. She used nicer words. He rubbed both hands over his face, then let them fall. "You would have liked her. She doesn't let me get away with much." The cabin settled. Elias looked at the second mug on the shelf, the one he never used and never put away. He did not remember taking it down. Maybe he had done it earlier. Maybe some part of him still prepared for company before the rest of him could object. He sat there a long time. Then, quietly, because the truth embarrassed him, he said, "I'm tired, Naomi." The words did not break him. That surprised him. They simply entered the room and stayed. Near midnight, snow brightened the porch in silver blue light. Elias stood at the window, watching it gather on the steps. For a moment, he saw the old house, the empty kitchen, Conrad's clean gloves, Marin's steady eyes, Luke's map, Naomi's scarf. He had spent 3 years guarding the dead from the living. Maybe that was not the same as loving them. The thought was small, dangerous, and strangely warm. By morning, the snow had stopped. The world beyond the cabin shone white and new, though Elias knew better than to trust appearances. He dressed in his olive-drab combat shirt, the fitted body worn soft with age, camouflage sleeves marked by faint horizontal bands at the upper arms. Over it he pulled his old canvas jacket. He laced his boots, touched Naomi's ring beneath his shirt, and picked up his keys. At the door he paused. There was still time not to go. Still time to make coffee, stack firewood, run until his knees ached, and call that survival. Instead, Elias stepped into the cold. His truck started on the second try. The road into town curved beneath the pines, sunlight flashing through branches like broken glass made holy. Elias drove toward the rescue barn with both hands on the wheel, not because he had decided to heal, not because he believed in signs, not because grief had loosened its grip. He drove because, for the first time in a long while, the thought of coming home to something breathing did not feel entirely like betrayal. The Brindle Falls Winter Rescue Barn did not look like a place where fate would wait. It looked like a county storage building that had been scrubbed, warmed, decorated, and politely lied about. Strings of yellow bulbs hung from the rafters. Folding tables held paper cups of coffee, sugar cookies shaped like bones, and donation jars with paw print stickers on them. The air smelled of straw, wet fur, pine cleaner, and the sharp cold that followed people in every time the big sliding door opened. Outside, snow fell with the soft confidence of something that had all day. Inside, the dogs wore red bandanas. That detail almost made Elias turn around. There were young hounds with bright eyes and foolish tails. There were terriers dancing on their hind legs as if auditioning for applause. A plump black lab leaned into the hand of a woman in a purple coat, already forgiven for every muddy crime he would ever commit. People laughed. Volunteers knelt. Cameras clicked. Someone's grandmother called every dog sweetheart in the exact same voice. Elias stood near a stack of hay bales and kept both hands in his jacket pockets. He had not expected the place to feel cheerful. That made it worse, somehow. Cheerfulness had a way of putting grief in a corner and telling it not to drip on the floor. He wore his old canvas jacket over the olive combat shirt he had put on that morning without thinking. The fitted body of the shirt still held its shape, olive drab through the torso, camouflage sleeves worn pale at the elbows, faint horizontal bands at the upper arms. It was not a uniform. Not anymore. But the cloth remembered things. So did he. A beagle puppy sneezed near his boot. Elias looked down. The puppy sneezed again, offended by winter, existence, and possibly Elias himself. Against his will, Elias almost smiled. "Careful," a woman said beside him. "That one weaponizes cuteness." 3 families have already surrendered. The speaker was short, broad-shouldered, and built like she had wrestled more than one stubborn animal into a bathtub and won. Her silver hair escaped from under a red wool cap, and a ring of keys hung at her belt, clinking whenever she moved. Her barn jacket was patched at both elbows. One pocket bulged with dog treats. "June Haskell," she said, offering a hand. "I run the place," which is a dignified way of saying I get bitten, peed on, and ignored by donors. Elias shook her hand. Her grip was warm and blunt. "Elias Mercer. I know who you are." She looked him over, not unkindly. Marin called. Of course she had. Elias glanced toward the exit. "Then you know I'm not here to be talked into anything." "Good. I hate talking people into things. They blame you later." June nodded toward the cheerful chaos. "You can look around. Drink bad coffee. Pretend not to like anything. That's a common first step. I'm not looking for a puppy." "I didn't think you were." Something in her tone made him look at her more closely. Before he could ask, the barn door rolled open again. Cold air swept inside, and with it came Conrad Voss. The room shifted around him, not dramatically. Brindle Falls was too practiced for that. But shoulders straightened. Volunteers smiled too quickly. One of the county commissioners near the coffee table touched his tie, though no tie had been endangered. Conrad entered in a charcoal wool overcoat, leather gloves, polished boots, silver hair combed back as neatly as if Weather were a servant who knew better than to muss him. He carried no dog treats. He carried presence. "June," Conrad called, voice warm enough for public use. "Looks like a fine turnout. Dogs are easier to love than people," June said. "Helps attendance." A few volunteers laughed. Conrad smiled as if he had personally funded humor. Then his gaze found Elias. "Mr. Mercer." Conrad crossed the barn with the relaxed stride of a man entering a room that owed him something. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Neither did I. I suppose winter softens us all." Elias said nothing. Conrad's eyes flicked over his jacket, the combat shirt beneath, the work boots salt-stained from the roads. "Planning to adopt?" "Planning to stand here a while." "Ambitious." Conrad turned slightly, making sure the nearest people could hear without appearing to listen. A man living alone out in Sawtooth Hollow should choose carefully. The wrong companion can become another burden. June's keys gave a faint, sharp jingle as she shifted her weight. Conrad continued, smooth as ice over deep water. "Though perhaps there's a certain poetry in matching difficult cases. Something old, something stubborn, something that has frightened off everyone sensible." A few people gave uncertain chuckles, the kind of laughter people offered a powerful man when they did not like the joke, but liked their jobs. Elias looked at him. There had been a time when a sentence like that would have made his hand move before his judgment caught up. Age had not made him gentler. It had made him slower to waste force. "Poetry," Elias said, "usually improves when fewer men explain it." June coughed once into her sleeve. It may have been a laugh wearing a disguise. Conrad's smile held, but the temperature inside it dropped. "Enjoy the event. I'll try to survive it." Conrad moved on to shake hands with donors, leaving behind the faint scent of expensive wool and something Elias had come to associate with men like him, the confidence of never having to raise their voice. June watched him go. That man could make a Christmas card feel like a tax notice. This time Elias did smile, though barely. June nodded toward a side door, half hidden behind stacked crates. "Come on." "The dog I mentioned isn't out here." "I didn't ask about a dog." "No," June said. "But you didn't leave either." That was irritatingly true. She led him through the side door into a narrower corridor where the noise of the adoption event dropped behind them. Here the barn felt less decorated and more honest. Concrete floor, metal drains, stacks of clean blankets, a whiteboard marked with feeding times and medication notes. The smell of disinfectant was stronger. At the far end stood a woman in a sheriff's department jacket, arms folded, dark hair cut to her jaw and threaded with silver. She had the stillness of someone who noticed exits before furniture. A radio with old tape along one side rested on her shoulder. "Deputy Nora Bell," June said. "She's here because Joy requires paperwork." Nora's gaze moved over Elias, not hostile, not welcoming, assessing. "Mr. Mercer, Deputy, Marin Whitlock says you have experience with working dogs." "She said that?" "She said enough." Nora's voice was dry. "I prefer not to repeat therapists. Makes me feel underqualified." Elias almost liked her. June unlocked another door. "Before we go in, understand something. This one is not part of the public event. She's not available for regular adoption today. She's reactive, medically uncertain, and smart enough to make fools out of sentimental people. Then why show her to me?" "Because she's miserable," June said simply, "and because she stops eating whenever we move her to the front kennels. Too much noise, too many hands. Too many people making kissy noises like idiots." From somewhere behind the door came no bark, no whining, no claws scrabbling on concrete, only silence. June opened the door. The back kennel was lit by a single high window and a heat lamp clipped to a beam. Snowlight entered pale and blue, laying itself across the floor in a narrow stripe. 3 runs stood empty. In the 4th, behind a reinforced gate, stood a German shepherd, not young, not pretty in the way adoption posters liked. She was yellow and black, with a dark saddle running down her back like old coal rubbed into fur. Her sides were lean, too lean. Her muzzle was black, silvered near the whiskers. The edge of her left ear had been torn, not badly, but enough to give her profile a jagged, battle-worn look. One eye was clouded faintly. The other was amber and bright. Her right hind leg carried weight reluctantly. But it was the way she stood that held Elias still. Not crouched, not pleading, not lunging. She stood angled toward the door, shoulders slightly forward, head level, ears measuring every breath in the room. She had placed herself so she could see June, Nora, Elias, and the only exit. Her body was tired. Her mind was not. Elias felt something in him go quiet. It was not peace. It was recognition. June spoke softly. Animal Control found her north of the service road after the last storm. No civilian chip we could read, no tags. Old collar mark, though. She was dehydrated, half-starved, and mad enough to convince a rookie he'd chosen the wrong career. She bite him? Elias asked. No. She looked at him until he dropped the catch-pole. Nora added, We've kept her separate. Not because she's vicious, because we don't know what she is yet. The shepherd's amber eye stayed on Elias. He did not move toward the gate. People who had never handled trained dogs often made the same mistake. They saw pain and rushed to comfort it. They saw fear and tried to erase it with hands. They forgot that hands could be questions, threats, cages, memories. Elias lowered himself slowly to one knee, far enough from the bars that the dog would not feel crowded. He turned his body slightly sideways. He did not smile. Dogs did not need human teeth at a time like this. The shepherd's ears shifted. Behind him, June held her breath. Elias inhaled once, slow. Then, in a voice he had not used in years, low and even, he said, At ease. The change was small. So small, most people would have missed it. The shepherd's shoulders lowered a fraction. The tension along her spine softened, not surrendering, only recalculating. Her head remained high. Her eye remained sharp. But some invisible wire inside her had loosened. Nora saw it. Her posture changed. June whispered, Well, I'll be damned. Elias felt the words strike somewhere beneath his ribs. He had expected pain, if anything. He had expected memory, maybe regret. He had not expected the strange, uncomfortable pull of being understood by a creature who had not asked his name. The dog took one step forward. Her bad leg dragged slightly, but she corrected her balance with practiced economy. She came only as far as the inner gate. Then she stopped and looked at Elias, as if waiting to see whether he knew the next rule. He did. He placed his hand on his own knee, palm down, still. The shepherd lowered her nose. She did not lick him, did not wag, did not soften into pet store gratitude. She sniffed once through the bars. Then she stepped back and sat. A clean sit, old, slow, flawless. For the first time since entering the barn, Elias forgot the noise beyond the walls. Conrad's voice broke the moment. Remarkable. Elias did not turn immediately. June did, and the look she gave Conrad suggested she would happily feed him to 3 separate livestock guardians if county law allowed. Conrad stood in the doorway, one gloved hand resting against the frame. I wondered where everyone had gone. This area is staff only, Nora said. I fund half this staff, Conrad replied pleasantly. No, June said. You fund half the coffee and take credit for the dogs. Conrad ignored her. His eyes fixed on the shepherd, then on Elias kneeling before the gate. Something like amusement touched his mouth. Well, he said, there's your match, Mercer. The shepherd's ears angled toward him. Elias rose slowly. Conrad stepped closer, peering into the kennel as if inspecting damaged equipment. Old, difficult, past whatever usefulness she once had, but still theatrical. He glanced toward Elias. You two could sit by the fire and frighten children with stories of better days. Nora's jaw tightened. June's face went red. But Elias did not flare. The anger came, yes, clean and hot, but it passed through him and found no loose weapon in his hands. He looked back at the shepherd. The dog had not retreated. She stood again, her body angled now between Conrad and the others, tired leg and all. That decided him. Not pity, not defiance, not Conrad. The dog had heard cruelty enter the room and had still chosen her post. "What's her name?" Elias asked. June's expression shifted. "We don't know. We've been calling her Shepherd 8 on the intake chart, which is a crime against language." Elias studied the dog's amber eye, the clouded one beside it, the black and gold fur dulled by neglect but not stripped of dignity. Outside the high window, late afternoon light had begun to fade toward blue. That hour, just before night, when the world held its breath and even the pines seemed to listen. "Vesper," he said. June was quiet for a moment. "Evening prayer." Elias nodded once. "Something like that." Conrad gave a soft laugh. Poetic after all. Elias turned to him at last. "You were right about one thing." Conrad lifted an eyebrow. "She isn't for sensible people." The room went still. June's mouth twitched. Nora looked from Elias to the dog, then back again. "This is not a same-day adoption. I figured. She'll be fostered to adopt," Nora said. "Supervised. Home inspection. Vet appointment within 48 hours. No off-leash activity. No public exposure until we assess her. No training drills unless cleared. If she shows aggression you can't manage, she comes back." Elias nodded. June added, "And if you try some macho nonsense because you think old war stories make you invincible, I will personally remove her from your care and shame you in church." "I don't go to church." "I'll start a rumor. More efficient." Elias looked at Vesper. She had remained standing, watchful, waiting. "I won't force her," he said. That answer mattered more than he knew. June heard it. Nora did too. Conrad's amusement faded, replaced by something tighter. The joke had gone wrong. It had walked out of his hands and chosen another meaning. "Suit yourself," he said. "I'm sure the two of you will make a charming picture. Ruins beside ruins." Elias did not answer. Vesper did. A low sound gathered in her chest. Not a full growl, not a threat thrown wild. A warning, measured and ancient, like thunder still hidden behind the mountain. Conrad's eyes flickered. Only for a second, but Elias saw it. So did Nora. Conrad smoothed his glove. "Deputy, June." He left. The air seemed warmer after him. June exhaled. "I hate that man in a way that keeps me young." Nora stepped closer to the kennel, careful not to crowd the dog. "You understand what you're taking on, Mercer?" "No," Elias said. That earned him Nora's first almost smile. "Good, honest answer." June brought the paperwork on a clipboard, along with a worn leather lead and a temporary orange ID tag. Elias signed where he was told. Foster agreement, medical acknowledgement, liability forms, contact numbers. Nora reviewed each condition with the precision of a woman who trusted procedure more than emotion. Elias did not resent it. Rules, when made for protection rather than power, had their place. When June opened the kennel, Vesper did not rush out. She waited. Elias crouched again and clipped the lead to her collar, slow enough for her to stop him if she chose. Her fur smelled of straw, antiseptic, and cold iron. Up close, he could see the pale patch on her chest, a narrow streak of lighter gold, like a scar made of sunlight. "You ready?" he asked. Vesper looked past him to the open door. Then she stepped out. The walk through the barn changed everything. At first, the adoption crowd barely noticed. Then one childless couple with a terrier turned to look. A volunteer stopped pouring coffee. The black lab at the front table whined and tucked closer to his new owner. Vesper did not bark. She did not pull. She moved with a slow limp, head level, eyes traveling from person to person, exit to window, window to door. She walked half a step behind Elias and slightly to his left. Not heel, exactly. Not pet, position. The old pattern pressed into Elias's memory like a thumb against a bruise. Conrad watched from near the donation table, surrounded by people who wanted his money and feared his disappointment. His smile had returned, but it sat poorly on his face now. Elias felt the lead in his hand, light but real. For years, he had avoided holding anything that might pull back. At the truck, Vesper stopped. She looked at the cab, looked at Elias, looked at the road beyond. "You don't have to like it," he said. "You just have to get in." She stared at him. June, who had followed them out, snorted. "Excellent negotiation. Very warm." Elias opened the passenger door and lifted the blanket he had spread over the seat that morning, though he had told himself he was only being practical. Vesper put her front paws up, hesitated when her bad leg trembled, and for one brief second Elias reached toward her. She turned her head sharply. He stopped. "All right," he said softly. "Your terms." The dog held his gaze. Then, with a stiff, stubborn effort that looked almost offended by assistance, she climbed into the truck herself. June smiled. "That one's got pride." Elias closed the door gently. "Good." Nora handed him a copy of the foster papers through the window. "I'll check in tomorrow. I'll be there." "You'd better be." June leaned in from the other side. "Feed her small portions. Soft food. Keep the cabin quiet." "And Mercer?" He looked at her. "Don't mistake her silence for trust." Elias glanced at Vesper. She sat upright in the passenger seat, not relaxed, not afraid, watching the rescue barn through the windshield, like a soldier leaving one battlefield and refusing to turn her back too soon. "I won't," he said. The drive out of town was slow. Snow turned the road pale. The heater ticked and coughed. Vesper remained seated, bracing herself through each curve, amber eye reflecting the white world beyond the glass. Elias did not speak for several miles. Then, as the first pines of Sawtooth Hollow rose ahead, he said, "I don't know what they did to you." Vesper's ear twitched. "I won't ask tonight." The dog looked at him then, only once. It was not affection. Not yet, but it was something. By the time the cabin appeared between the trees, dusk had settled over the snow, blue and silver and deep. Elias parked beside the porch and turned off the engine. For a moment, neither man nor dog moved. The little cabin waited, dark-windowed and quiet. For the first time since he had bought it, Elias wondered if the place might sound different, with another heartbeat inside. He opened the truck door. Vesper stepped down carefully, touched the snow with her good front paw, then her bad hind one, and stood facing the trees. Not the cabin, the trees. Elias followed her gaze into the darkening woods. Nothing moved. Still, Vesper's body had gone very still, her ears raised toward the black line of pine, as if something out there had spoken in a language only old soldiers and older forests remembered. Elias tightened his hand around the lead. "Welcome home," he said. Vesper did not look at him. But she did not pull away. Vesper did not enter the bedroom. For the first 3 nights, she chose the place by the front door where the draft came in beneath the frame and the whole cabin could be watched without moving much. Elias put down an old military blanket, folded twice, with a bowl of water beside it, and soft food June had insisted on in a handwritten note taped to the bag. Vesper sniffed the blanket. Then she looked at Elias as if checking whether it came with conditions. "It's not a trap," he said. She stepped onto it with one paw, tested the fabric, circled once with the careful stiffness of an old soldier lowering herself into a trench, and lay down facing the door. That was the arrangement. Elias did not ask for more. The cabin changed in small ways after that, not loudly, not in a way a visitor would notice, but a second breathing entered the room at night, low and uneven. The old floorboards learned another weight. A water bowl clicked faintly against the wall. Once, at 2 a.m, Elias woke to the sound of Vesper rising in a rush because the metal lid of the wood box had shifted and struck the stove. She did not bark. She froze. Her body went hard, every muscle drawn tight, head low, ears forward. Elias sat up on the couch, not the bed. He had not slept well enough to earn the bed. "Easy," he said. Vesper did not look at him. The stove ticked as the fire settled. Slowly, carefully, Elias reached not toward her, but toward the wood box. He lifted the lid an inch, then set it down softly. "Just metal," he said. "Bad manners, no hostile intent." Vesper's cloudy right eye caught the stove light. Her good eye remained sharp, amber, and ancient. After a long moment, she stepped back onto the blanket and lay down again. Elias did not tell her she was safe. He had learned that safety, spoken too soon, sounded like a lie. By the fourth morning, Vesper had begun inspecting the cabin according to a system of her own. She ignored the bookshelf entirely, disapproved of the bathroom, accepted the kitchen, and deeply objected to one pair of Elias's wool socks. The socks were gray, thick, and full of holes near the heel. Elias found them on the porch before sunrise, arranged side by side in the snow like evidence at a trial. He stared down at them. Vesper sat inside the doorway, expression unreadable. "Those were clean." Her left ear twitched. They were almost clean. The ear twitched again. Elias picked them up, shook off the snow, and for reasons he did not understand, laughed once. The sound startled him more than it startled the dog. It was not much of a laugh. Rusty, short, half ashamed of itself. Still, it had come from him, from some place grief had not fully boarded over. Vesper watched him with grave attention, as if assessing whether humans often made such broken noises before breakfast. "They offended you," Elias said. Vesper blinked slowly. "Understood. I'll notify command." That evening, Elias sat at the small table with 2 mugs in front of him by mistake. He noticed only after the coffee had cooled. One mug was his, chipped at the rim. The other was blue ceramic, the one he never used and never put away. Naomi would have said the second mug meant his soul was less stubborn than his mouth. Luke would have said it meant his father was haunted by kitchenware, which sounded inconvenient but very American. Elias touched the handle of the blue mug. Vesper lifted her head from the blanket. "I know," he murmured. "Not regulation." The dog placed her muzzle back down, but she did not close her eyes. Elias had begun speaking their names again. Not often, not in long speeches, just small mentions, like setting stones along a path so he could find his way back. Naomi liked the first snow, he told Vesper one night while sharpening a carpenter pencil with his pocket knife. Said it made the world look like it had decided to start over. The blade scraped wood in slow curls. Luke hated shoveling it, loved climbing in it. That boy could contradict himself before breakfast. Vesper gave a long, weary sigh from the doorway. Elias looked over. Yes. He was young. Youth is mostly contradiction, with better knees. Another sigh. He found, in those quiet exchanges, that talking to Vesper was not like talking to the empty chair. The chair gave nothing back. Vesper did not answer in words, but she reacted. An ear, a glance, a shift of weight, a judgment, often severe. When Elias's voice grew too soft around Naomi's name, Vesper sometimes lowered her head all the way to the floor, not asleep, not bored, only present, like a sentry outside a chapel. She still would not let him touch her head. The first time he forgot and lifted his hand too high, she moved away so fast the bowl rattled. Elias dropped his arm at once. "Sorry." Vesper stood near the stove, wary but not panicked. Elias turned his palm down and held it near his own knee. "Shoulder only. Your call." A minute passed, then another. At last Vesper came forward, not because she had forgiven him, but because she had decided the correction had been understood. She stopped at his side and allowed his fingers to rest lightly against the fur above her shoulder. Her body was warm, too thin beneath the coat. The bones there spoke of hunger, age, and roads too cold to remember kindly. Elias did not stroke her. He simply kept his hand still until she stepped away. "Fair terms," he said. After a week, he began taking her on short walks. Not runs, not drills. Nothing Nora Bell could write him up for in her neat, merciless handwriting. just slow morning walks along the lower trail behind the cabin where the pine branches bent under snow and the creek made black music beneath its lid of ice. Vesper walked with effort, favoring the bad hind leg, but her attention never weakened. She read the forest differently from any pet Elias had known. She noted the squirrel tracks, yes, and the deer paths, but those were not what interested her most. Her nose paused over places where machines had passed months before. Her ears tilted toward the distant grind of a snowplow before Elias heard it. She stopped beside a broken branch where sap had frozen into amber tears and studied the air as if the whole mountain had left a message there. "You're not retired," Elias said one morning. "You're just unpaid." Vesper ignored him, which seemed to confirm it. On the 9th day, Elias chose the longer path. He told himself it was because Vesper needed variety, because the vet had said gentle movement would help her joints, because the weather was clear and the snowpack firm. All true enough. Not the whole truth. The longer path bent north, toward Black Antler Pass. He did not notice his breathing change until Vesper stopped and looked back at him. The trees thinned ahead. Beyond them, the old service road climbed between rock walls, its surface hidden beneath plowed snow and ice. Farther up, where the road narrowed before the pass, Naomi and Luke had gone over the shoulder 3 winters ago. Elias's hand tightened on the lead. "We're not going that way." Vesper stood still, her nose lifted. Her good eye narrowed toward the road, not at the place where the guardrail curved, but lower, toward a sidetrack half buried under drifted snow. Elias pulled gently. Vesper. She did not move. Not defiant, not afraid, simply certain. He felt anger rise, sudden and unreasonable. Not at her, at the road, at the mountain, at the cold blue morning for looking beautiful where it had no right. "No," he said, harder. Vesper turned then and stepped in front of him. Her old body formed a crooked barricade between him and retreat. It was absurd. She was thin, lame, half a ghost of whatever powerful creature she had once been. Elias could have lifted her if he wanted. Instead, he stood there with snow gathering on his boots and felt a pressure build behind his ribs. "Don't," he whispered. The word came out before he knew who it was meant for. Vesper did not soften. She did not lean into him. She did not perform comfort like a trick. She just stood there, holding her place in the white world, while Elias fought a battle no one else could see. He had avoided this road for 3 years. Avoidance had begun as survival, then become ritual, then law. He had told himself there was nothing there but pain, nothing useful, nothing living. Vesper lowered her head and sniffed the snow beside the sidetrack. Then she looked back once, not pleading, asking. The question was not whether Elias was ready. He was not. The question was whether not being ready had ever stopped the dead from staying dead. Elias shut his eyes. When he opened them, the road was still there. "All right," he said, voice rough. "Slow." Vesper turned and led him down the sidetrack. The path had not been used recently, but beneath the crusted snow, Elias could see old ruts where heavy tires had once cut into the ground. Not a public road, more like an access route for maintenance vehicles or logging equipment. Pines crowded close on both sides, their lower branches broken in places. The air carried the faint smell of rust, frozen mud, and something oily the cold had not fully buried. Vesper moved with new focus. Her limp remained, but her mind seemed to pull the body forward. She stopped near an abandoned ranger outpost half hidden behind spruces, then veered toward a rusted barrel tipped on its side beside a collapsed woodpile. Elias followed, every sense sharpening despite himself. The snow there was shallower, scoured by wind. Vesper sniffed around the barrel, pawed once at the ground, then sat. Not a casual sit, a marker. Elias stared at her. "You find something?" Vesper kept her eyes on him. He crouched and brushed snow aside with one gloved hand. Beneath the powder lay frozen leaves, dirt, and the edge of something metal. He dug carefully until he could grip it and pull. A bent piece of road sign came free with a shriek of ice. It was not large, maybe 2 feet across, torn from a bigger warning marker. The front was scraped nearly bare, but a few black letters remained under grime and frost. Slip. Elias stopped breathing. He turned it over. On the back, beneath rust and old mud, clung a smear of faded orange paint. Survey paint. The kind used to mark routes, equipment, temporary work zones. His pulse beat once, hard. Then again. Vesper remained seated in the snow, silent as a judge carved from winter. Elias looked toward the pass above them. The official report had said, black ice, poor visibility, a sudden loss of control. No mention of missing signs, no mention of a service track, no mention of construction paint. His first thought was ridiculous. His second was worse. He tucked the metal under one arm and stood too quickly. The trees tilted for a second. Vesper rose with effort, watching him. "This doesn't mean anything," he said. The words sounded weak. Vesper turned back toward the cabin, as if she had no interest in arguing with lies. By noon, Elias had placed the sign fragment on his kitchen table. He circled it for an hour. He called Marin, then hung up before the line connected. He considered calling Nora, then imagined her asking reasonable questions he could not answer. Where did you find it? Why were you there? How do you know it mattered? Why now? The last question was the worst. Because a dog looked at snow differently than I did. That would not hold in any room where men signed official forms. Near 2 o'clock, Elias drove toward the church basement, where the winter meal program served soup 3 times a week. He did not bring Vesper inside. June had warned against crowded spaces. The dog stayed in the truck with the window cracked, wrapped in a blanket, watching every person who crossed the lot. Inside, the church basement smelled of vegetable broth, coffee, wet boots, and old hymnals. Men and women sat at folding tables beneath fluorescent lights, some speaking softly, others eating with the steady concentration of people who knew warm food was not a small thing. Elias found Orville Tate near the back wall. Orville wore an oversized army coat that had faded into a color somewhere between green and surrender. His white beard was uneven, his red wool hat sat crooked, and a small brass bell hung from the side of his battered backpack. He was addressing 2 crows through the narrow basement window, though the glass was closed and the birds outside seemed unimpressed. "No, absolutely not," Orville told them. "I am not appointing a 3rd subcommittee. The last one ate my crackers." Elias stood beside the table. Orville looked up. His eyes were pale blue, watery at first glance, but not empty. "Mercer, you here to donate soup or interrogate the soup? I need to ask you about Black Antler Pass." The humor did not leave Orville's face all at once. It drained from the edges inward. "That mountain charges interest," he said. Elias sat across from him and placed the sign fragment on the table, wrapped in an old towel. Orville did not touch it. He stared. The room around them seemed to continue as before, spoons scraping bowls, chairs shifting, someone laughing near the coffee urn, but at that table the air changed. "Where'd you get that?" Orville asked. "Service track north of the pass, near the old ranger outpost." Orville's fingers tightened around his spoon until they trembled. "You shouldn't go poking there." "Why?" "Because things poke back." Elias waited. Orville looked toward the window, toward the crows, toward anything but the metal between them. When he spoke again, his voice had lost the theatrical wobble he used for jokes. "I worked road maintenance once," he said. "Part-time. Before I became a cautionary tale with boots. I know." "No, you don't." Orville's eyes flicked to him. "People know the end of a man and think they know the whole road." Elias accepted that. Orville swallowed. "That night, your family's accident. I was up by the old outpost. Storm came in mean. I'd found a corner out of the wind." Elias felt his body go very still. "I heard trucks after midnight," Orville said. "Not plows. Heavier, chain rattle, diesel, men talking. I saw lights through the trees. They were moving barriers, pulling signs." Elias's hand flattened on the table. "Who?" Orville gave a small, bitter laugh. "Son, if I say names, the walls grow ears. Did you report it?" I tried. Shame passed over his face like cloud shadow. Told a deputy, not Bell, man before her. He wrote something down maybe, maybe not. I sent a letter to the paper too, didn't sign it. Coward's way, I know. Why didn't you come to me? Orville's gaze sharpened. And say what? Hello, grieving man with military hands. I saw shadows move road signs. The night your wife and boy died. I smelled diesel. I heard men curse. I was half froze and 3 drinks deep. You think grief would have made you gentle with that? Elias had no answer. The old man looked back at the sign. His voice dropped. They made that road look like it had always been empty. By morning, snow did the rest. Snow is a fine accomplice. Pretty face. No conscience. Elias heard his own pulse. Naomi's laugh came to him suddenly, not as a ghost, but as a memory cruelly alive. Luke's hand on the kitchen map. The sheriff's voice. Black ice. Poor visibility. No one's fault. No one's fault. The words, once dull from repetition, grew teeth. Outside the basement window, one of the crows hopped along the sill and struck the glass with its beak. Tap. Orville flinched. Elias looked at the sign fragment between them. It had seemed heavy in his hands before. Now it felt like the first bone of something buried. "Orville," he said carefully, "do you know who was on that road?" The old man's mouth twisted. "I know whose trucks weren't supposed to be." He would say no more. Not then. When Elias stepped back into the cold, Vesper was standing in the passenger seat, front paws braced, eyes fixed on him through the windshield. The blanket had slipped to the floor. Her body looked tired, but alert. Elias opened the door. She sniffed the air around him, then the towel-wrapped metal in his hand. For a moment, he thought of taking it to Nora immediately. He thought of marching into Conrad's office. He thought of every violent, useless thing grief could dress up as justice. Instead, he climbed into the truck and sat there without starting the engine. Vesper lowered herself carefully beside him, her bad leg trembling once before, settling. Elias looked toward the white line of the mountains beyond town. For 3 years, Payne had been a room without windows. Now a crack had opened in the wall. It did not show him freedom. Not yet. Only a sharper darkness, and somewhere inside it, a question. What if Naomi and Luke had not simply been taken by winter? What if winter had only covered the tracks? Elias did not go to Conrad Voss. That was the first victory, though it did not feel like one. For most of the drive back from the church basement, rage sat beside him in the truck like another passenger, broad-shouldered and breathing smoke. It offered him useful images. Conrad's office door kicked open, the rusted sign slammed onto a polished desk, Elias's hand around the man's perfect collar. Grief liked violence because violence gave it something simple to do. Vesper sat in the passenger seat, wrapped in the old blanket, her cloudy eye half closed and her amber eye fixed on the road. "You're judging me," Elias muttered. Her ear twitched. "I haven't done anything." The ear twitched again. Yet, snow dragged thin white veils across the highway. Brindle Falls looked gentle under it, the church steeple rising like a finger telling heaven to keep quiet. Elias passed the bank, the diner, the real estate office where glossy photographs of future resort cabins filled the window. At the center of town stood a billboard for Voss Ridge Holdings, showing a smiling family on skis beneath the words, "A brighter winter for Brindle Falls." Elias almost pulled over. Instead, he drove to Dr. Marin Whitlock's office. Marin did not act surprised when she opened the door and found him standing there with a piece of rusted metal wrapped in a towel. She only looked at his face, then stepped aside. "Come in before you decide to solve something with your fists." "That obvious? You have a very loud silence?" Vesper was not allowed inside the therapy office yet, so Elias left her in the truck with the heater running low and the window cracked, parked where he could see her from Marin's upstairs window. The dog sat upright, watching pedestrians as if each one might be carrying orders from a forgotten war. Marin's office smelled of peppermint tea and old paper. Elias placed the sign fragment on the coffee table. Marin did not touch it. That was one of her gifts. She knew when an object was not merely an object. He told her about Orville, the trucks, the barriers, the missing warning sign. He spoke without drama, because if he let emotion near the words, the room might not hold him. When he finished, Marin leaned back, hands folded over the green-gray notebook in her lap. "What do you want to do?" she asked. "You know what I want to do. I know what anger wants. I'm asking what Elias wants." He looked at the sign. The remaining letters stared back. Slip. Not even a whole word. Just the broken beginning of a warning no one had been allowed to read. "I want him to admit it," Elias said. "Conrad, I want him to look me in the eye and say he knew. And if he doesn't?" Elias said nothing. Marin's voice softened. "Then you need more than pain. Pain is evidence to the person carrying it, not to everyone else. That's supposed to calm me down? No, it's supposed to keep the truth alive long enough to matter." Outside, Vesper shifted in the truck, lifting her head toward the window as if the conversation had brushed against her name. Marin followed his gaze. "If you go after Conrad too soon, he'll make this about your grief, your service, your therapy. He'll call it instability before anyone can tie it evidence." Elias's jaw tightened. "He will use your wounds," she said. "Don't hand them to him sharpened." The words landed hard because they were true. By late afternoon, Elias had driven to a narrow brick storefront 2 blocks from the courthouse. A faded sign above the door read, "The Brindle Ledger." The local paper had been there since before Elias was born, surviving recessions, floods, 3 mayors, and the internet mostly through stubbornness and obituaries. Inside, the office was warm, cluttered, and smelled like black coffee that had given up on being fresh around noon. A woman stood over a layout table, red pencil tucked behind one ear, silver blonde bob falling along her jaw. She wore a charcoal sweater, dark trousers, and a brick-red scarf looped twice around her neck. Her face was narrow, sharp, with sleepless intelligence. She looked up, saw Elias, then saw the towel in his hand. "I'm not taking ads for snow tires after 4, she said. "I'm not selling tires." "Good." "I hate writing cheerful copy about rubber." "Lydia Kearns?" "Depends who's asking." "Elias Mercer." That changed the air, though not her expression. Lydia Kearns had edited the Brindle Ledger for 12 years and had irritated every powerful man in town at least once, which made Elias trust her slightly more than average. Still, she did not look eager to become part of anyone's crusade. "I remember your family," she said, not gently, but carefully. "I'm sorry. People keep saying that." "Yes," Lydia said. "We're very poor at inventing new words for the unbearable." Elias placed the sign fragment on a stack of old newspapers. Lydia did not touch it immediately. Like Marin, she understood weight. He told the story again. This time it sounded thinner, less sacred, more exposed beneath fluorescent lights. Lydia listened without interrupting. When he mentioned Orville's letter, her eyes shifted away for half a second. "You got one," Elias said. She took the red pencil from behind her ear and set it down. "Maybe. That means yes. It means this paper receives a great many unsigned letters from men who believe the county commission is controlled by elk, angels, or Canadians. Orville isn't crazy." "No," Lydia said quietly. "But he was unreliable. Or at least, that was the easy word for him. The admission did not come with self-defense." That made it harder to hate her. "I remember the letter," she said after a moment. "Not all of it. Something about trucks at Black Antler Pass. Warning barriers. Voss survey crews. I put it in a folder for follow-up. And then the folder became one more thing on a desk full of things. Conrad bought 6 months of full-page ads for the resort proposal. The county issued a statement saying the accident was weather-related. Orville disappeared for a while. Her mouth tightened. And I let the story die. Elias stared at her. Lydia met his eyes. Hers were gray-blue and tired, but they did not retreat. "I can help you now," she said. "That doesn't improve what I failed to do then." "No," Elias said. "It doesn't." She nodded once, accepting the blow. Then she picked up the sign fragment with both hands, turned it over, and studied the orange paint on the back. "This kind of marking," she said, "looks like temporary survey paint." "That's what I thought." "Thought? Or knew?" "Thought." "Good. Keep the difference. It matters." She reached for a legal pad and began writing. "We need permits, road maintenance logs, weather records, the original accident report, any public notices about survey access near Black Antler, and Orville's letter, if I still have it. You can find all that? I can find some. Nora Bell can find more, if she's willing to risk a headache. She's cautious. Cautious is useful. Cowboys make terrible investigators." Lydia glanced toward the window where Vesper sat visible in the truck below. "And the dog?" She found where the sign was dumped. Lydia's eyebrow lifted. "The dog found it." She followed scent. Oil, metal, old tracks. She didn't pull a confession out of the snow. "Good," Lydia said. "Because if I print 'Hero Dog Solves Road Conspiracy,' I'll deserve to be fired by my own conscience." Despite himself, Elias almost smiled. Lydia saw it and returned to writing before either of them could be embarrassed. The next day, Deputy Nora Bell arrived at Elias's cabin just after sunrise. She stepped from her cruiser in a dark sheriff's jacket, black gloves, boots biting into crusted snow. Vesper watched from the porch, body angled, not growling, but making no promises. "Dog looks better," Nora said. "She hates my socks. Shows judgment." Elias handed her coffee in a travel mug. She accepted it, sniffed once, and looked mildly surprised it was drinkable. Inside the cabin, the sign fragment lay on the table between them. Nora read Elias's notes, then Lydia's list, then Orville's name. "I don't like old cases built on bad memory," she said. "I don't either. I don't like dogs as evidence." "She isn't evidence." "Good." Nora sat down without being invited, which seemed to be her way of entering the matter officially. She pulled a folder from her bag, a copy of the accident report. "I looked at it last night," she said. Elias felt his hand close around his mug. Nora tapped the top page. "Not reopening anything yet, understand?" "I understand words." "Then understand these. There are gaps." The cabin seemed to listen. "The report has only 6 scene photographs," Nora continued. "For a fatal double vehicle recovery in winter mountain conditions, that's light. Time of road crew arrival is listed as 2:40 a. But dispatch notes suggest the plow wasn't called until after 3. Barrier condition is marked not applicable, which makes no sense at that curve. There's a maintenance appendix referenced, but not attached. Missing? Maybe misfiled? Maybe never included." Nora's eyes sharpened. "Maybe removed. We are not saying which until we can prove it." Elias looked down at the report. Naomi and Luke's names sat in official type, flat and clean. Bureaucracy could make death look well organized. "Who signed it?" he asked. "Sheriff's office, county road supervisor, state patrol liaison. 2 of those men are retired. 1 is dead. And Conrad? Not named. But his company? Not named," Nora repeated. "Which may be the point, or maybe nothing. We move carefully." Carefully. The word grated against him. Then Vesper rose from the porch outside and scratched once at the door. Not frantic, not warning. A reminder. Elias opened it. She stepped in, sniffed Nora's boots, judged them acceptable, and went to lie near the stove. Her presence changed the cabin from interrogation room to something stranger. A war council held by people too tired for banners. By the end of the week, Conrad's pressure began. First came the letter from the county assessor, announcing a review of the old Mercer property valuation due to developmental changes in the district. Elias read it twice, then set it beside the sink. The next day, his boss at the supply yard, Ed Pritchard, called him into the cramped office behind the lumber racks. Ed was a thick-necked man with sawdust permanently embedded in his beard and the moral courage of a rabbit near a fox den. "Elias," Ed said, not meeting his eyes, "you know I like you. That's usually the start of something I won't." Voss Ridge is reviewing their supplier contracts. Big accounts, real big. They asked about workplace reliability. Elias waited. "And, well, there's talk you've been stirring things up. Old accident stuff, emotional strain." Ed rubbed his face. "I'm not firing you. I'm just saying maybe take a few days. Let things settle. Unpaid." Ed's silence answered. Elias walked out before he could say something that would make Ed feel braver than he was. By Friday, 2 men at the diner stopped talking when Elias entered. A woman he had once helped dig out after a snowstorm looked away in the grocery store. The rumor moved through town in the soft shoes rumors preferred. Elias Mercer was unraveling. Elias Mercer was seeing patterns because grief had eaten too deeply. Elias Mercer had found a broken dog, and now both of them were chasing ghosts through the snow. That evening, Lydia came to the cabin with a paper folder and a hard look. "I found Orville's letter," she said. Elias took it. The handwriting staggered across the page, uneven but legible. Trucks after midnight, barriers moved, orange paint, men laughing near the outpost. Don't let them say the mountain did it alone. Elias read the last line 3 times. Don't let them say the mountain did it alone. Lydia stood near the table, arms crossed. "We can publish." "No." She blinked. "No? Not like this. Elias, if we wait too long, Conrad buries it deeper. And if you print this now, he buries Orville." Lydia's expression tightened. Elias placed the letter on the table beside the sign fragment. "He'll drag out Orville's drinking, his homelessness. Every time someone saw him talking to birds, he'll make the whole town laugh at him before they ask whether he's telling the truth. That may happen anyway. Then not because I fed him to Conrad." Lydia looked at him for a long moment. "You understand this delays your own case." "I understand. Do you?" Her voice sharpened. "Because 3 days ago you looked like a man deciding which window of Conrad's office would break easiest. I still know which one." That almost pulled a laugh from her. Almost. Elias looked toward Vesper. The dog lay with her head on her paws, eyes open. "Conrad uses people. Their fear, their jobs, their debts, their shame. I'm not going to use Orville's just because it helps me." The room went quiet. This was not forgiveness. It was not peace. It was a harder thing. Restraint chosen while rage was still alive. Lydia picked up the letter slowly and slid it back into the folder. "All right," she said. "Then we find the kind of proof that can stand beside him instead of on top of him." The next morning, Elias returned to the old ranger station with Vesper. He did not go alone this time. Nora knew where he was. Lydia had photographed the sign fragment. June had threatened him over the phone about overworking the dog so creatively that even Vesper had seemed impressed. The outpost crouched beneath snow-heavy spruces, its roof sagging, windows boarded, walls weathered gray. It had not been officially used in years, though the front lock had been cut and replaced more than once. Elias carried a flashlight, gloves, and a pry bar. Vesper wore a harness June had loaned him, loose enough not to rub old scars. Inside, the air smelled of mouse nests, old paper, rotting wood, and cold metal. Vesper moved slowly through the room, not searching on command. Elias had given none. She chose her own pace, nose close to the floor, pausing at doorways, cabinet corners, a collapsed cot. Elias followed, careful not to lead her with hope. In a back room, beneath a shelf of ruined binders, Vesper stopped. She sniffed the lower cabinet. Then she sat, the same clean marker sit she had used near the sign fragment. Elias crouched. The cabinet door was swollen shut. He worked it open with the pry bar, wood groaning in protest. Inside lay old gloves, a cracked flashlight, a coil of mildew-stained rope, and a leather pouch stiff with age. Vesper leaned forward, sniffing the pouch, then stepped back, Elias opened it. Inside was a broken identification tag. Metal darkened, corner split through one punched hole. He wiped it with his thumb. Letters emerged. Vesper. MWD. Search and recovery. For a moment, the outpost disappeared. Elias sat back on his heels, the tag in his palm, while the wind moved around the old building like a choir that had forgotten the words. MWD. Military Working Dog. Search and recovery. Not attack, not patrol. Recovery. A dog trained to find the lost. The buried. The living beneath wreckage. The dead when living was no longer possible. Elias looked at Vesper. She stood beside him, old and thin and silent, her torn ear outlined against the dusty light. He had thought she read the forest like a soldier. He understood now. She read it like a mourner with a mission. "How did you end up here?" he whispered. Vesper's amber eye met his. No answer. Only the quiet fact of her. The tag did not solve Naomi and Luke's deaths. It did not name Conrad. It did not prove a crime. But it explained something Elias had felt and not trusted. Vesper was not wandering toward random pieces of the past. She was following the grammar of work carved into her body long ago. Places where people had vanished. Places where metal broke. Places where the world had been disturbed and then covered. Outside, snow began again, light and steady. Elias closed his fist around the tag, not as evidence, not yet, but as a name restored to its owner. Vesper lowered her head and sniffed the threshold, leading back out into the white. Elias stood. "All right," he said. "We do this slow. We do it right." The old dog looked toward the trees. This time, Elias did not mistake her silence for mystery. It was discipline, and perhaps, in its own severe way, mercy. By noon, Brindle Falls looked almost holy. Snow had been falling since morning, soft and bright, laying itself over rooftops and pickup beds and church steps with the tenderness of a hand smoothing a blanket. The mountains beyond town disappeared and returned by turns, their dark shoulders moving behind veils of white. Storefront windows glowed amber. Chimneys lifted thin gray prayers into the sky. For a few hours, winter pretended it had come only to decorate the world. By 4, the wind changed its mind. It came down through Black Antler Pass with teeth. The snowfall turned sideways. Branches slapped against windows. The road beyond Elias's cabin vanished beneath blowing drifts, and the pines of Sawtooth Hollow bent and groaned like old giants forced to kneel. On the radio, the county emergency channel repeated the same warning in a tired voice. Stay indoors. Avoid mountain routes. Visibility near zero above the lower ridge. Elias stood by the kitchen counter, checking the batteries in his headlamp. He had no reason to be uneasy yet. That was what he told himself. Vesper disagreed. She had been restless since dusk, not pacing wildly, not panicking, but moving in deliberate circuits from the front door to the stove, from the stove to the window, from the window back to the door. Each time the wind struck the cabin, her torn left ear angled toward the forest. Her bad hind leg trembled when she turned too quickly, but she would not lie down. "Barometric pressure," Elias said. Vesper stopped and stared at him. "All right. You don't like the weather." She gave a low whine, almost swallowed by the wind. Elias looked toward the dark window. The glass reflected his own face back at him. Gray eyes, rough stubble, the faint line of the scar near his temple. Behind the reflection, the forest had disappeared into white. The phone rang. He did not jump, but his hand closed around the counter's edge before he answered. "Nora?" "Mercer." Deputy Nora Bell's voice was clipped, wind hissing behind it. "You heard from Orville today?" Elias straightened. "No, he's missing." The words made the cabin smaller. Nora continued. "He was seen near the church around noon. Someone said he planned to go back toward the old ranger station before the storm worsened. Said he left his good gloves there." "Of course he did," Elias muttered. "He hasn't checked in at the warming shelter." June hasn't seen him. I've got a unit trying the lower road, but the pass access is turning ugly. Vesper came to the kitchen doorway and stood very still. Elias looked at her. You calling search and rescue? I called Miles Ardent. He's assembling 2 volunteers, but with this wind, they can't push higher until visibility improves. Conrad's on the county advisory line telling everyone to wait until morning. Elias's jaw tightened. Why is Conrad on any line about Orville? He funds half the winter rescue equipment. The answer was practical. That made it worse. Nora's voice dropped. He said risking trained personnel for a man who chooses to wander is bad judgment. Outside, the wind struck the cabin so hard the walls shuddered. Elias said nothing. 3 years ago, other men had used cleaner words. Procedure, conditions, limited visibility. We did what we could. The language had been different, but the shape was familiar. Wait, soften, explain, bury. Mercer, Nora said. Don't do something stupid. I'm getting my gear. That qualifies. I know the lower trail to the station. You know it in daylight. I know it better than Orville knows a hospital bed. That is not the standard I prefer. He pulled open the closet by the door. I'll keep radio contact. You tell Miles to stage at the lower service gate. If I find sign, I'll mark it. A pause. Then Nora exhaled through her nose, sharp and unhappy. You go on Channel 3. You check in every 10 minutes. You take flares. If I say turn back, you turn back. Elias was already laying out rope, a climbing harness, thermal blanket, first aid kit, hand warmers, flashlight, collapsible shovel, and 2 orange flares. Nora. What? I'm not leaving him out there. This time, the pause was longer. Channel 3, she said. 10 minutes. He hung up. Vesper stood between him and the door. No, she did not move. You're old. Your leg's bad. Visibility's garbage. June will skin me and hang me from the barn rafters. Vesper held his gaze, amber eye bright in the dim cabin. Elias reached for the harness June had lent him for controlled walks. Vesper stepped into it before he could finish bending down, as though patience with human denial had officially expired. Fine, he said, tightening the strap carefully. But if you collapse, I'm lecturing you from here to Easter. Her ear twitched. It was possibly agreement, possibly contempt. He dressed for the storm. Base layer, wool, waterproof shell, gloves, gaiters, headlamp. He clipped the radio to his chest strap and looped the rope over one shoulder. At the last second, he grabbed an old scarf from the chair near the stove, not Naomi's green one from the old house. This one was plain gray, rough wool, something he had bought at a gas station years before and never liked. He shoved it into his pack anyway. Outside, the storm hit like an open hand. The porch light showed only a few yards of the world. White air, black trunks, the steps already filling with snow. Vesper lowered her head into the wind. Elias leaned against it, one hand on the lead, the other gripping a trekking pole. They moved into the trees. The forest swallowed the cabin almost at once. Snow erased distance. The headlamp beam became a small tunnel full of flashing ice. Elias checked the compass more than the trail, counting landmarks by memory. Split pine, low boulder, creek bend, fallen spruce. Vesper did not pull. She moved slowly, nose low when the wind allowed, pausing when the gusts became too fierce. Mercer! Nora's voice crackled over the radio. He stopped behind a cluster of pines and pressed the button. Still on lower trail, about 15 minutes from the service cut. Visibility? Bad. That is not a measurement. Then professionally bad. A burst of static. Then, faintly, Miles is at the gate. 2 volunteers with him. They can't get the snow rig past the lower bend yet. Tell him to keep the engine warm. Don't make me regret not arresting you preemptively. Elias almost smiled. Would have been warmer. He released the button. Vesper had turned sharply toward the east. Not toward the ranger station's front approach. Toward a drainage line that ran below it, a place choked with brush and half-buried culverts. Elias knew it from summer runs. In winter, it was a trap with a polite white roof. "No," he said. Vesper looked back. The wind screamed through the pines. Somewhere far off, a branch cracked like a rifle shot. Elias felt the sound move through him. Not memory yet. Just a warning bell in the blood. Vesper gave one short bark. Not fear. Marker. Elias swallowed. Slow. They left the trail. The ground dipped beneath the snow. Twice Elias sank to the knee. Vesper stumbled once, her bad leg buckling, and he reached down without thinking. She did not snap this time. She allowed his hand under her chest long enough for balance, then pushed forward again with offended dignity. "Stubborn old queen," he breathed. Her tail moved once. Maybe not. The wind might have done it. They reached the drainage hollow 20 minutes later. Elias's beard had iced over. His gloves were stiff. The radio hissed against his chest, Nora demanding a check-in. He answered with numb fingers. "At the culvert line east of the station. Vesper has sent, or thinks she does." "Or thinks she does?" "She's more certain than I am." "I'm shocked." Another voice cut in, male, breathless but controlled. "Mercer, this is Miles Ardent. We're moving up from the gate on foot. Give me a sound mark if you find anything." Miles sounded younger than Elias expected, and less foolish than Elias hoped. Good. "Foolish men died fast in storms." "Copy," Elias said. He lowered the radio, then he heard it. At first, it was nothing. Just the storm playing with metal somewhere in the trees. Then it came again. A thin, irregular sound. Not a branch, not ice. A bell. Vesper stopped so abruptly Elias nearly tripped over her. Her whole body aimed toward a dark break in the snowfield ahead, where a drainage pit had been covered by a weak crust of ice and drift. The bell came again. Tiny. Ridiculous. Alive. Elias's chest tightened. "Orville!" The storm answered. Vesper barked 3 times, short and hard, then lunged toward the pit. Elias caught the lead before she could get too close. "Easy." Easy. He crawled the last few feet on his stomach, spreading his weight. His headlamp beam cut over the edge. Below, maybe 8 feet down, half buried in slush and snow, lay Orville Tate. His red wool hat was gone. His beard was crusted white. One arm was pinned awkwardly under him, the other still looped through the strap of his backpack. The little brass bell tied to it shook whenever he shivered. His eyes opened halfway. "Mercer?" His voice was paper-thin. "Tell the crows." Meeting postponed. "Not canceled?" "Never canceled." Elias almost laughed, and the sound nearly broke into something else. He keyed the radio. "Found him. Drainage pit east of the station. Alive. Hypothermic. Need extraction. Marking with flare." Nora's voice came back instantly. "Stay out until Miles reaches you." Orville groaned below. Water moved beneath the snow. The pit was filling slowly from runoff under the culvert. Elias looked at Vesper. She lay flat near the edge, as close as he dared let her go, barking down in measured bursts. Orville's eyes drifted toward her. "Well," he whispered, "that's not a crow." "No," Elias said, unclipping rope. "That's command staff." He anchored the rope around a pine trunk, checked the knot twice, then checked it a 3rd time because Miles Ardent would have done the same. He tied into the harness and lowered himself over the edge. Halfway down, the storm changed. Not outside, inside. The hollow became another place. White became headlight glare. Wind became the roar of an engine. The smell of wet earth became gasoline and hot metal. Elias's boot slipped against the icy wall, and for one terrible second he was no longer descending toward Orville. He was standing beside Black Antler Pass 3 years too late, looking at twisted guardrail, hearing a sheriff say Naomi's name as if it belonged to paperwork. His breath vanished. The rope burned against his gloves. Above him, Vesper barked once, sharp. Again. Then a tug struck his sleeve. Not hard enough to tear, just enough. He looked up. Vesper had crawled close, teeth gripping the loose fabric near his shoulder where the rope passed. Her eyes locked on his. Not comfort. Command. Elias drew one breath, then another. The pit returned. The rope, the cold. Orville below him, alive and shaking and absurdly complaining to mountain birds. "I'm here," Elias whispered, though he did not know which of them needed to hear it. He reached Orville, wrapped the gray scarf around the old man's neck, then clipped the rescue line under his arms as carefully as the cramped space allowed. Orville tried to help and mostly succeeded in swearing creatively. "Your bedside manner is poor," Orville muttered. "My floorside manner's worse." Good to know. By the time Elias had him secured, headlamps appeared above, 3 beams cutting through snow like spears. Miles Ardent dropped to his knees at the edge, red rescue jacket bright, even in the storm, a coil of cobalt rope slung over one shoulder. He had the lean, wind-burned face of a man who trusted knots more than promises. "Nora's right behind me," Miles called. "We pull on 3. "Slow," Elias shouted. "He's cold and banged up." "Copy." Nora appeared beside him, black gloves already on the rope. "Mercer, if you die in that hole, I'm citing you. Add it to my file." Together, they pulled. Not elegantly, not like myth. There was slipping, cursing, snow in collars, rope biting into palms. Vesper stayed flat near the edge, barking whenever Orville's head drooped, then licking his cheek the moment he cleared the rim. Orville blinked at her. "Ma'am," he whispered, "you have terrible breath." Vesper licked him again. "Fair." They wrapped him in the thermal blanket and loaded him onto a rescue sled. Miles checked his pulse and pupils. Nora radioed for the ambulance to meet them at the lower gate. Elias knelt beside Vesper, whose sides were heaving now, each breath rough with effort. "You did enough," he said. For once, she did not argue. She lowered her head onto his boot. The trip down took nearly an hour. The storm fought every step. Miles led the sled. Nora walked beside Orville, talking to keep him conscious. Elias followed with Vesper, one hand beneath her harness when the drifts grew deep. Several times she leaned into him without pride, and he gave support without comment. Some truces were too sacred to name. At the lower gate, ambulance lights painted the storm red and blue. Orville was lifted inside, wrapped like a disgruntled saint in foil and blankets. Before the doors closed, he turned his head toward Elias. "I told you," he rasped. "Told me what?" "The mountain keeps receipts." Then his gaze moved to Vesper. "And she knows where they're filed." The doors shut. Nora stood in the flashing light, snow clinging to her hair and jacket. For once, she looked less like procedure and more like a person who had nearly arrived too late and knew it. "Miles will file the rescue report," she said. "So will I." Elias looked at her. She understood the question. "Orville's not just a rumor anymore," Nora said. "Not after tonight." Across the road, Miles loaded his rope into the rescue truck, glancing once toward the black ridge above them. Something in his face had changed too. A man who had hesitated before the storm had walked into it and come back carrying someone the town had nearly left behind. Elias lifted Vesper into his truck. This time, she let him. At the cabin, long after Nora called to say Orville had reached the clinic alive, Elias sat on the floor beside the stove. Vesper lay with her head on his thigh, too tired to pretend distance mattered. Outside, the storm moved on toward the valley. Inside, the cabin held a new kind of silence. Not empty. Not healed. Witnessed. Elias rested one hand on Vesper's shoulder. "You found him," he said. Her eyes stayed closed. "No," he corrected softly. "We did." The word felt unfamiliar. We. Small as a match flame. Bright enough to trouble the dark. After the storm, Brindle Falls did not become kinder all at once. Towns rarely did. They shifted the way old houses shifted after a hard freeze. A groan in the beams, a crack in the plaster, a door that no longer closed quite the same. People still bought coffee at dawn and complained about plow schedules. The diner still burned toast on the left side of the griddle. The church bell still rang at noon, whether anyone deserved mercy or not. But when Orville Tate's name was spoken, fewer people laughed. That was something. He survived the night in the drainage pit with 2 bruised ribs, mild frostbite in 3 fingers, and a cough that made June Haskell threaten to staple him to a clinic bed if he tried leaving early. Orville accepted the threat with dignity, asked if the staples would be county-funded, and then fell asleep with the small brass bell from his backpack resting on the table beside him. The bell became the first thing the town could not turn into rumor. Too many people had heard it mentioned on the rescue radio. Too many knew Elias had followed it through the storm. Too many had seen Vesper lifted into Elias's truck afterward, exhausted and ice-flecked, her old body shaking, but her head still raised. The story moved through Brindle Falls by breakfast. Not as proof, not yet, but as an ache. A man most of them had dismissed had nearly died within shouting distance of the old ranger station. A dog too old to be useful had found him. A Q Navy SEAL many had called unstable had gone into the storm when safer men advised waiting. And Conrad Voss had advised waiting. That part traveled quietly at first, then less quietly. Lydia Kearns refused to print it as gossip. She sat in the office of the Brindle Ledger with a coffee gone cold beside her, pinning documents to a corkboard beneath the headline she had written in red pencil and not yet used. Black Antler Pass Reconstruction of a Night. It's not a story until it can stand up, she told Elias. He stood beside the corkboard, arms crossed, still sore from the rescue. Vesper lay under the layout table, nose tucked near one of Elias's boots, her bad leg stretched carefully to the side. She had slept most of the previous day, waking only to eat, drink, and judge anyone who came too close to her shoulder. Lydia tapped a page. Orville gives us location and witness memory. Your sign fragment gives us a physical object. Nora gives us report irregularities. Miles gives us dispatch timing. But what we still don't have is a bridge between Voss Ridge and the road that night. Conrad won't hand us one. No, Lydia said. Men like Conrad never hand you bridges. They build toll booths and call it civic improvement. Elias looked at the board. Maps, dates, weather reports, copies of old permits. A Ledger article from 3 years ago announcing a proposed winter resort road under private feasibility review. A second article, 6 months later, about the feasibility review being paused due to environmental and safety concerns. Then, nothing, like a trail erased by fresh snow. Nora Bell arrived 20 minutes later with a folder under her arm and the expression of a woman who had slept badly but blamed no one because blame took energy. I filed a preliminary request for case review, she said. Lydia looked up. Officially? Official enough to make my captain unhappy. Elias turned. And he told me reopening a closed fatal accident based on a homeless man, a retired soldier, and a dog would make the department look foolish. What did you say? Nora removed her gloves finger by finger. I said we looked more foolish losing the maintenance appendix. Lydia made a soft sound that might have been admiration. Deputy Bell, I'm beginning to find you dangerously attractive as a source. Try to control yourself. Nora laid out copies of dispatch logs from the night of the accident. Her finger moved down the page. Official report says the first plow reached the pass at 2:40 a. Minus dispatch record says the plow was not assigned until 3:12. That doesn't prove a cover-up. It proves either incompetence or altered summary. Both wear the same boots around here, Lydia said. There's more. Nora pointed to a line of numbers. The rescue crew staging note lists restricted visibility, barrier status uncertain, but the final report says barrier status not applicable. Elias stared at the words. Barrier status uncertain, not applicable. A life could disappear inside language that small. Miles Ardent came that afternoon, still in his red rescue jacket, though the storm had passed and sunlight glittered off the snowbanks outside. He looked uncomfortable indoors, as if walls were weather he did not understand. His cobalt rope was coiled over one shoulder out of habit. "I checked the old dispatch book," he said, "the handwritten one. We kept it before the system went digital." Nora frowned. "That should be archived." It was, in a box under avalanche beacons from 2008. Miles gave a tired half-smile. "My predecessor wrote notes in the margins." "Night of the Mercer accident," he wrote. "Advised not to document moved barricade until county supervisor confirms." The room stilled. Elias did not move. Lydia's pencil stopped scratching. Nora's face changed only slightly, but the slightness was enough. "Who advised?" "Doesn't say." Miles looked at Elias. "But that's not the worst part." Of course it was not. The gods of hard truth were never satisfied with one offering. Miles pulled a folded photocopy from inside his jacket. 2 days after the accident, Voss Ridge donated new avalanche gear to the rescue team. No announcement, just a quiet delivery. My predecessor marked it as equipment replacement. Lydia took the paper. Payment? Maybe generosity. No one laughed. Vesper lifted her head, as if the silence had become a sound. Elias stepped away from the board and looked out the window. Across the street, the town square was bright with snow. A woman carried groceries. A man cleared his windshield. 2 teenagers shoveled the sidewalk outside the hardware store, tossing snow at each other between strokes. Life continued with a shamelessness he almost envied. For 3 years, he had believed the mountain took Naomi and Luke. Now the mountain seemed less like a killer and more like a witness forced to wear white gloves. That evening, Elias drove back to the old road maintenance shed below Black Antler, this time with Nora, Miles, and Vesper. June had protested the dog going at all, but Nora agreed Vesper would not be asked to search beyond a controlled walk. The old shepherd wore her harness and moved with slow dignity, accepting the entire group as barely adequate support staff. The shed stood behind a locked chain-link gate, half buried in snow and forgotten budgets. Nora had obtained the key from county storage, though she did not say how much arguing it required. Inside, the air smelled of cold rubber, rust, old salt, and mouse droppings. Vesper sniffed along the wall where broken signs and traffic cones had been stacked for years. She paused near a pile of bent barricade panels, their reflective orange stripes dull with age. Miles crouched beside them. "These are the old mountain road type. County stopped using this model 2 winters ago." Nora photographed every angle. Elias stood back, letting procedure do what anger could not. Then Vesper sat, not by the barricades, by a dented metal cabinet near the rear door. Miles opened it with a crowbar after Nora photographed the lock. Inside were rags, cracked flares, 2 empty cans of survey paint, and a clipboard wrapped in plastic. The paper had warped from moisture, but several lines remained readable. Dates, vehicle numbers, fuel amounts, initials. One set of initials appeared more than once. G.E. Lydia tracked the initials by morning. "Graham Elwood," she said over the phone. 57, former contract driver for Voss Ridge. Worked seasonal surveying and equipment runs. Wife had kidney failure around the same period. Medical debt. Foreclosure notice. The whole American hymn. "Where is he now?" Elias asked. "Still in town. Lives off Larch Road. Drives for a propane company." Elias said nothing. Lydia's voice softened by 1 degree. "Do not go there alone and terrify him into silence." "I wasn't planning to terrify him. You're 6 feet tall, grieving, and travel with a scarred German shepherd named after evening prayer. You terrify by weather pattern." So Nora went with him. Graham Elwood's house sat at the edge of a plowed field, a low ranch home with peeling blue paint and a wheelchair ramp shoveled clean. Smoke rose from the chimney. A faded Voss Ridge cap hung on a nail beside the door, its logo nearly worn away. Graham answered after the 3rd knock. He was a thick-shouldered man, gone soft around the middle, with thinning brown-gray hair, a short, uneven beard, and eyes that looked tired before they looked afraid. When he saw Nora's badge, then Elias, then Vesper, standing quietly beside the porch steps, the color left his face. "I don't know anything," he said. Nora did not move. "I haven't asked." Graham looked at Elias. His gaze dropped quickly. That was answer enough to wound. They sat in his kitchen because his wife was asleep in the back room, and Graham did not want to wake her. A pill organizer sat near the sink. Medical bills were stacked under a magnet shaped like a sunflower. The house smelled of soup, wood smoke, and the sour edge of worry. Elias did not start with accusation. He placed the copied fuel log on the table. Graham stared at the initials. His hands began to shake. "I had bills," he said. Nora's voice stayed level. "That is not an answer. It's the only one I had then." The clock above the stove ticked with brutal patience. Graham rubbed both hands over his face. "I drove equipment up the service track that night. Survey stakes, barriers, paint. Conrad wanted the route checked before the county froze access for the season." "In a storm?" Nora asked. "He said weather made it easier." Fewer eyes. Graham swallowed. "We moved the warning barricade to get the truck through. It was supposed to go back." "Did it?" He closed his eyes. "No." Elias felt the room tilt, but his body did not move. Vesper leaned against his leg. Not dramatically, not for comfort, but enough to remind him of weight and floor and breath. Graham continued, voice breaking in small places. "After the accident, Conrad called everyone in, said the storm caused it, said nobody could prove what signs were up or down, said if we started talking, the project died, jobs died, and we'd all be responsible for ruining the town." "And your wife's treatment?" Elias asked. Graham looked at him then, eyes wet and ashamed. "He paid part of it, quietly." The truth entered the room like a cold animal. Not murder, not a villain twirling a knife. Something smaller, cheaper, uglier. A line moved, a warning not replaced. A rich man protecting a project. A poor man accepting silence because love and fear had cornered him. Graham stood abruptly, went to the pantry, and pulled down a round blue cookie tin. He opened it and removed a small black notebook wrapped in wax paper. "I kept this," he said. "Fuel runs, times, vehicle numbers. I told myself it was insurance in case Conrad turned on me." He gave a hollow laugh. "Then I told myself keeping it meant I still had a conscience." He pushed it across the table toward Elias, but Elias did not take it. Nora did. "Why now?" she asked. Graham looked toward the living room window, where Vesper sat in the snow beside the porch, old head high, watching the road. "Because that dog went into the storm for Orville," he said, "and I couldn't stand that an animal had more courage than me." The community meeting was held 3 nights later, in the old wooden church, because it was the only place in Brindle Falls large enough to hold the town and plain enough to shame it. No banners hung. No microphones at first. Just rows of pews, wet boots, wool coats, murmuring voices, and the stained glass windows turning the snow outside into blue fire. Lydia stood near the front with a folder of documents. Nora sat beside the aisle, official and unsmiling. Miles leaned against the wall with his arms crossed. Orville occupied the second pew wrapped in 3 scarves, his brass bell tied to his backpack as if attending under its own authority. Elias stood at the front. Vesper lay beside his left boot. Conrad arrived late. That was deliberate. Men like Conrad understood entrances. He wore a dark overcoat and silver scarf, his expression solemn enough for church and cold enough for business. Several council members followed him in like smaller moons. Elias began without raising his voice. He spoke of the night Naomi and Luke died. Not the private pieces, not the sacred ones, only the facts the town had been given. Black ice, poor visibility, no fault. Then he placed the sign fragment on a table. Lydia pinned up the old map. Nora read the dispatch discrepancy. Miles explained the rescue log note. Orville stood only long enough to say he had seen the barriers moved, then sat again, breathing hard but steady. Each piece was small. Together they formed a road. Then Conrad stood. "This is heartbreaking," he said. and the words sounded polished rather than felt. But grief often searches for patterns. Mr. Mercer has suffered more than any man should. That does not make these accusations responsible. Elias did not answer. Conrad turned to the pews. Voss Ridge has invested in this town when others abandoned it. Jobs, infrastructure, winter rescue equipment, tax revenue. Are we truly prepared to damage our future over the memories of a troubled drifter and paperwork being misread by people with personal grievances? Someone murmured. Someone else looked down. Conrad's voice grew warmer, more dangerous. We all loved Naomi and Luke. But the mountain took them, not progress, not business, not this community. At Elias's feet, Vesper lifted her head. Elias's hand trembled once. Vesper set her muzzle gently on his boot. Not enough for anyone to call it a miracle, enough for him to continue. Before he could speak, Graham Elwood rose from the back pew. The room turned. He had come in quietly, wearing his old denim jacket with the fleece lining. His face looked gray under the church lights. In one hand, he held his cap. In the other, he held nothing at all. Nora already had the notebook. "Conrad's lying," Graham said. No one breathed. Conrad's face did not change, but his eyes did. Graham walked slowly down the aisle, each step dragging 3 years behind it. I drove the Voss Ridge truck that night. We moved the barrier. We didn't put it back. Conrad knew. "Graham," Conrad said, voice low with warning. Graham flinched. Then he looked at Orville. The old man gave him a small nod, as if passing a match across a dark room. Graham faced the church again. "I kept quiet because my wife was sick and I needed the money. Because I was scared. Because Conrad told us the storm would take blame better than any man." His voice cracked. "That dog went back into a blizzard for someone this town forgot. I hid behind bills and fear for 3 years. He turned to Elias then. "I am sorry," he said. The apology did not fix anything. But it did not vanish either. It stood there, shaking, human, insufficient, alive. Conrad stepped into the aisle. "This is absurd. A desperate man trying to cleanse his conscience by inventing—" Nora rose. "Mr. Voss, sit down." The church went silent. Conrad stared at her. "Deputy, you are far outside your authority." "No," Nora said. "Tonight I am exactly where it begins." That was when the room changed. Not with applause, not with shouting, with the sound of people, no longer looking away. A councilman removed his glasses. The diner owner covered her mouth. June, standing in the back, wiped one eye with the heel of her hand and pretended it was allergies. Miles stared at the floor like a man measuring the cost of every time he had chosen caution over courage. Elias looked out at them all and understood something that brought no comfort but did bring clarity. Conrad had not buried the truth alone. He had only known where the town was willing to dig. The meeting ended without celebration. Nora collected statements. Lydia collected copies. Graham sat in the front pew as if his bones had finally become too heavy. Conrad left through a side door, coat flaring behind him, his kingdom not destroyed but cracked. Outside, snow fell lightly. Elias stood on the church steps with Vesper beside him. The town moved past in hushed clusters, speaking quietly, no one quite sure what history required of them now. Orville shuffled up, wrapped like a poorly assembled prophet. "Well," he said. That was cheerful. Elias let out a breath that was almost a laugh. Orville looked down at Vesper. "Your committee work is improving, ma'am." Vesper ignored him with dignity. Across the street, the billboard for Voss Ridge glowed under a street lamp. A brighter winter for Brindle Falls. The words looked different now, less like a promise, more like a question the town had finally learned how to ask. The investigation did not end with sirens. That disappointed some people. Brindle Falls had always liked its justice easy to recognize. A man in handcuffs, a door slammed, a headline large enough to fold over breakfast. But truth, once dragged out of the snow, moved more like an old animal with a wounded leg. It limped, it paused. It required forms, interviews, state investigators, insurance records, sworn statements, and men in gray suits who spoke in careful sentences no one would ever stitch onto a pillow. Conrad Voss was not arrested in front of the church. His empire did not collapse by morning. But by the end of the week, Voss Ridge Holdings had postponed all public meetings. By the next, the state had frozen permits connected to the resort road. A month later, 2 investors quietly withdrew. The billboard in the town square remained standing for a while, still promising a brighter winter for Brindle Falls. But someone had thrown a snowball at the word brighter, and the frozen smear stayed there until the next thaw. Conrad was still seen in town. That, too, disappointed people. He appeared once outside the bank, silver hair combed back, dark coat immaculate, his face composed in the way of a man determined not to grant the public the pleasure of seeing him bleed. A few people nodded to him out of habit, fewer than before. He paused as if expecting more, then continued down the sidewalk alone. Power rarely vanished in a flash. Sometimes it simply discovered the room had grown colder. Elias Mercer watched all of this from a distance. He gave statements, he answered questions, he handed over the sign fragment, the copies of Lydia's records, the location of the old road maintenance shed, and the broken tag that belonged to Vesper. Norabel made sure everything entered the proper channels. Lydia Kearns published not a triumphant exposé, but a severe, carefully documented series of articles that left very little room for Conrad's lawyers to call her reckless. Miles Ardent submitted his rescue logs. Graham Elwood testified through tears and nausea, looking 10 years older each time he came out of the courthouse annex. Orville Tate, who had recovered enough to become unbearable again, declared that justice was a mule in formal shoes and therefore could not be rushed. No one knew what that meant. Everyone suspected he did. Through it all, Elias waited for relief. It did not come. The truth had not returned Naomi's laugh to the kitchen. It had not put Luke's boots by the back door. It had not restored the years Elias had spent accusing Winter, because it was easier than accusing men. It had only cleared a patch of ground and shown him what had been buried there. Some mornings, that felt worse. On a pale Thursday, after the community meeting, Elias drove to the old Mercer house. Vesper rode beside him, as she always did now, no longer rigid in the seat, but not careless either. Age had not made her soft. Trust had only given her permission to be tired. Her torn ear flicked whenever a truck passed. Her cloudy eye reflected the white road. Her good one remained fixed ahead, amber and alert. The house stood in the center of town beneath a clean blue sky. Snow lay along the porch rail in smooth white lines. The maple tree in the front yard, the one Luke had fallen from at 9, stretched bare arms over the roof. Naomi's sage bed slept under the drifts beside the steps, waiting for spring with the patience of things that trusted seasons better than people did. Elias sat in the truck with both hands on the wheel. Vesper looked at the house, then at him. "No commentary," he said. She sighed. "Noted." He opened the door. The old house smelled colder than memory. Dust, wood, faint soap from closets unopened too long. He stood in the entryway while Vesper stepped inside behind him, her nails ticking against the floorboards. She paused, sniffed the air, and did not hurry. The house was not a battlefield to her, not yet a home, merely a place dense with human weather. Elias opened the curtains. Light entered rudely. It crossed the floor, climbed the wall, touched the blue curtains Naomi had chosen, and landed on Luke's map still pinned in the kitchen. Dust rose in the brightness like tiny, embarrassed ghosts. Elias expected to break. He did not. That frightened him in a different way. He walked into the kitchen and stood before the table. The 2 empty places were still there, though no plates marked them. He had thought emptiness was something that waited unchanged. But it had been moving without him. The silence in the room was not the same silence he had fled 3 years ago. Vesper sniffed Naomi's chair. Then she sneezed. Elias looked down. "You have an opinion?" She sneezed again, with conviction. For the first time in that house since the funeral, Elias laughed. It did not echo as cruelly as he expected. The sound rose, struck the ceiling, and came back smaller, almost welcome. He spent the morning opening windows for 10 minutes at a time, despite the cold, sorting old mail, checking pipes, taking sheets off furniture. He did not touch Naomi's scarf. He did not remove Luke's maps. Some things did not need to be conquered just because a man had entered the room. Near noon, Maren arrived. She did not come in like a therapist entering a crisis. She came carrying sandwiches in a paper bag and wearing boots, practical enough for emotional weather. Her chestnut hair was tucked into a gray knit hat, and her cheeks were red from the cold. "I brought lunch," she said. "I didn't ask for lunch. You rarely ask for anything useful." Vesper accepted Maren with a slow blink, which from her counted as a parade. Maren looked around the kitchen. Her gaze touched the scarf, the map, the sunlight on the floor, then returned to Elias. She did not say the house looked nice. It did not. It looked wounded. But the windows were open, and that was enough for one day. "What are you thinking?" she asked. Elias rubbed one thumb over the back of his old watch. "That I can't sell it." "That sounds different from before." "It is." Before, not selling had been a refusal. A guard posted at a tomb. Now it felt like a question. "What else?" Maren asked. He looked toward the front room, large and unused. Then the dining room. Then the hallway leading to the spare bedrooms upstairs. Orville nearly died because there wasn't a warm place close enough that he trusted, Elias said. There are veterans sleeping in trucks by the freight shed. People with dogs who won't go to the shelter because the shelter won't take animals. Men like Graham who drown quietly in bills. Women who won't ask for help until the pipes freeze. Maren said nothing. "There's too much house," Elias said. The words surprised him. Not because they were painful, because they were simple. Vesper moved to the sunny patch near the stove and lowered herself with a groan worthy of ancient royalty. Maren followed his gaze and understood before he said more. "You're not opening a shelter alone." "No, doesn't has." "Good. Because I was about to throw this sandwich at you." He looked at her. She lifted the bag slightly. "Turkey. It would be a waste, but I'm committed to boundaries." The first meeting happened around the kitchen table 2 nights later. Not a formal board, not yet. Just people who had, in one way or another, stopped looking away. June Haskell came with a tote bag full of dog food samples, flea treatments, and 3 opinions before removing her coat. Nora Bell brought a clipboard and a fire safety checklist because Hope, in her view, should know where the exits were. Lydia carried a folder labeled Mercer House Public Use Options, which she claimed was not enthusiasm, but document discipline. Miles brought a toolbox and inspected the porch steps without being asked. Orville came last, wearing 3 layers and his red wool hat with the little brass bell tied to his backpack. "I assume this is where we form a secret society," he said. June pointed at him. "If you chant, you're leaving. I was promised snacks. You were promised heat. Same religion." Vesper lay beneath the table, chin on her paws, watching each pair of boots. When Orville sat down, she shifted just enough to place one paw against his boot. He froze. Then, very carefully, he looked around the table. No one saw that. Everyone saw it. No one said so. Some healings were skittish animals, too. They did not decide to build a grand refuge. Nora killed that idea with regulations before it could grow antlers. The house could not become a full shelter overnight. It needed inspections, insurance, approved occupancy limits, fire extinguishers, liability waivers, coordination with the church and clinic, and a dozen other unromantic necessities. But it could become a limited warming house on the coldest nights, by referral, with volunteers, with a pet-friendly room, with hot food delivered from the church kitchen, with Maren coordinating mental health support, June handling animal care, Nora checking safety, Lydia managing public donations and records so no one could accuse Elias of turning tragedy into theater. Miles repairing steps, locks, and the old back railing. Orville, after much debate, appointed himself Minister of Firewood and Crow Relations. There are no crows in the job description, Nora said. That's why they need representation. Elias sat at the head of the table, listening, not commanding. That was new. In the old life, leadership had often meant carrying the heaviest thing and pretending it weighed nothing. Here, leadership seemed to mean letting other people carry what they knew how to carry. It was harder, less heroic, more honest. On the first night the Mercer house opened, the temperature dropped to 12 below. The sign on the porch was temporary, painted by Lydia on a board Miles found in the garage. Mercer Winter House. No one left outside. Elias stood beneath it with a hammer in one hand and snow in his hair. The letters were not perfect. The spacing bothered Lydia so much she threatened to redo it in spring. Elias liked it as it was. Inside, the front room had been cleared. Folding cots lined one wall. The old dining room held a soup, pot, bread, coffee, and a large metal bowl of water for dogs. June had set up crates and blankets in what used to be Luke's gear room, muttering apologies to the absent young man every time she moved a box. The first person through the door was not a stranger. It was Orville. He stood on the porch, suddenly unsure, beneath all his layers and jokes. The bell on his backpack barely moved. "You know," he said, "I can sleep other places." Elias opened the door wider. "I know. Not helpless. I know that too." Orville looked past him into the warm hallway. His eyes moved to the staircase, the lights, the soup, the old hooks by the door where Naomi's coats had once hung. "I snore," he warned. June threatened worse. "That woman is a public hazard. Come in, Orville." The old man crossed the threshold. Something in Elias's chest shifted then, not breaking, not healing, just moving aside to make room. More came after. A veteran named Paul with a limping terrier. A woman from the freight shed who refused to give her last name but accepted 2 bowls of soup. A couple whose car had died outside town. Graham Elwood arrived carrying split firewood and did not look Elias in the eye until Elias took the first armload without a word. No speeches were made. No one praised Elias. That helped. Vesper stationed herself near the front room entrance, where she could see the door, the stairs, and the soup table, not guarding against the people inside, guarding the fragile agreement that tonight at least no one would be put back into the cold because their need arrived inconveniently. Late that night, after the last cot creaked quiet and Orville's snoring proved legally significant, Elias went to the kitchen. Naomi's scarf still rested over the chair in the corner. He picked it up. For a moment, his hands would not move. Then he folded it carefully and placed it on the back of a chair by the stove. Not in a box, not hidden away, just somewhere warmer. Vesper came to stand beside him. She leaned, gently this time, against his leg. "I know," he whispered. The next morning, Elias drove with Vesper to Black Antler Pass. The road had been plowed. Sunlight flashed over the snowfields. The mountains rose blue and white beneath a sky so clear it almost seemed innocent again. At the curve where the accident had happened, new temporary barriers stood in bright orange lines. Nora had seen to that personally. Elias parked on the shoulder. He carried a small wreath made of pine, sage, and twine. June had helped with the pine. Marin with the sage. Orville had tried to contribute a crow feather until Nora confiscated it as spiritually suspicious. Elias set the wreath near the guardrail. For a long time he said nothing. Then he spoke Naomi's name, then Luke's. The wind moved over the pass, lifting snow dust from the rocks. "I found out," he said. "Not all of it. Enough. More is coming." Vesper sat beside him, her black and gold coat bright against the white world, torn ear moving in the wind. "I kept the house," Elias continued. "Not the way it was. I couldn't. But it has lights now. People came in last night. Orville snored like a condemned engine. You would have laughed. His throat tightened, but he did not stop. "I'm sorry I made living feel like betrayal." The mountains did not answer. They were not cruel enough to pretend they could. Elias touched the ring beneath his shirt, Naomi's ring. Then he let his hand fall. "I'm still here," he said. It was not an apology. That was the miracle of it. On the way back, he did not drive straight home. He stopped at the lower trailhead of Sawtooth Hollow, where morning sun filtered through the pines and the snow lay clean beneath them. Vesper stepped down from the truck stiffly, but when Elias began walking, she followed. Not fast, never fast, but steady. Their tracks moved side by side through the snow. His deep and booted, hers smaller, uneven, proud. Elias did not run that morning to outrun memory. He walked because the road continued, because the house had lights, because the dead had been named and the living had been let in. Because beside him, an old German shepherd who had once been trained to find the lost, now moved through the winter as if her final mission had never been to uncover a crime. It had been to bring one man back to the world. Behind them, Brindle Falls woke slowly beneath the snow. Ahead, the trees opened to a pale gold ridge where spring, still far away, had begun its secret work under the frozen ground. Sometimes healing does not arrive like thunder. Sometimes it comes quietly, through an old dog at the door, a light left on, a bowl of soup, or one brave choice to stop leaving people outside in the cold. Elias learned that peace after loss does not mean forgetting the ones we loved. It means carrying their love forward, until an empty house becomes a shelter, and a broken heart becomes room for others. May God give you the courage to keep one small light burning, even in your hardest winter. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe stories like this still matter, please subscribe and stay with us for the next one.